he's prepared to do it in your name. The soldier's role is a small part of the secret U.S. nuclear war plan. He's one of 200 young men and women on duty at this instant, manning an arsenal of nuclear weapons that could, quite literally, end life as we know it. And if you're thinking that all this is ancient history, some relic of the Cold War, you'd be dead wrong. Correspondent George Kreil has spent 7 years traveling through the secretive nuclear empires of the United States and Russia. He takes us now inside this nuclear world.
It's a strangely peaceful, reassuring world, the wheat fields of America. Hard even to imagine that the most destructive weapons in history are hidden away under these farms.
How big is this base?
You're talking about for all the missiles, where all the missiles are at, there's 12,000 square miles.
It's kind of the size of a small state, isn't it?
That's correct.
And right now, at Warren Air Force Base, biggest ICBM base in the United States, it's really business as usual as it was during the Cold War on some level.
Without question, we do business as usual, just like you said, and nothing has changed.
Colonel Stacker, sorry to interrupt. The
Yes.
launch facility is 12 o'clock, approximately 3.5 miles.
This is the entrance to a nuclear launch control center. It's designed to look perfectly innocuous. 55 identical facilities like this one are spread all across the American West.
Watch your head, your step.
And in every one of them, 2 young launch officers, missileers as they call themselves, serving on combat alert.
Lieutenant Nameth and Lieutenant Del Toro. How old are you?
25.
And how long have you been a missileer?
For a year now.
Is there ever any question in your mind that you would be willing to launch one of these ICBMs?
Well, that's why we're here. I mean, if there were any doubt in any of our minds that we wouldn't do it, then we wouldn't be here.
We signed up knowing that whatever it takes to protect our country, we will do, and no second guessing whatsoever.
10 Minutemen intercontinental ballistic missiles, poised and ready to launch in minutes. And everywhere we went, that was the message of the missileers.
If it comes down to us having to launch a missile, then I'm sure that it's definitely necessary for us to do that to defend our country, and I will do that.
Do you think that it's possible that most Americans have forgotten that you're down there on alert?
They have. I'm sure they have.
They have what?
Forgotten. There's a lot of Americans that don't realize that we're still pulling alerts 24/7. Every single day we're down there defending this country.
Now, isn't that strange?
Actually, I think that's kind of reassuring because we do our job so well that they can put it behind them and say, hey, we're safe tonight to sleep.
Safe, they say, because while America sleeps, they're standing guard, prepared to launch.
I think the question is what makes them do it? What makes them go down into that silo for a 24-hour?
But it's kind of like what makes a submariner go undersea for 70 days at a time.
And more important, what makes them ultimately willing to follow through and execute the launch of weapons that would result in really the destruction, death of millions?
It's just a duty, a mission that we're called upon to do, to react to presidential orders. Being a civilian, I guess it would be hard to kind of comprehend that, but that's why we feel that no country would ever do that to ours.
For most Americans, those missileers simply don't exist. This is the 21st century, and America is on top. The world's lone superpower. Music, sports, billionaires, IPOs. It's all happening here, and nothing seems big or menacing enough to stop it. About the last thing on anyone's mind is the idea that we may be just minutes from doomsday. Up here in space, America is king. Most of these commercial satellites were born in the USA. But the real power in space belongs to the satellites you never see. Look carefully at this one.
It's ready to signal the launch of a nuclear attack. It's part of an elaborate network of military satellites that were built to spy on the Soviet Union. And today, nearly a decade after the end of the Cold War, Russia is still their primary target.
This is what they are looking at, Russia's nuclear empire. And this is what they were built to spot. A Russian ICBM launch. Check your watches. From the time this missile leaves its silo, it's 30 minutes until it could hit the United States of America.
A missile launch from, say, Russia would be detected within seconds.
General Chuck Horner is best known as the mastermind of the Allied air campaign during the 1991 Gulf War.
There it goes.
But from 1992 to 1994, General Horner commanded this mysterious facility, built to warn America about the one threat it has no defense against, nuclear weapons.
We have no ballistic missile defenses.
So if a missile comes in, there's nothing to be done about it.
Duck.
NORAD. It's America's early warning center, buried deep underneath Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado.
Cheyenne Mountain is a very interesting place. You drive in this huge tunnel, and when you get about half a mile or so down the road, 2 huge blast doors are there. And you suddenly come upon a steel building, not unlike a ship, if you will, housed in this huge cavity in the mountain. The building itself sits on these giant springs. And the idea of those springs is when a nuclear detonation occurs and shakes the whole mountain, the building will be able to resist this shock and won't be destroyed.
And the moment a missile launch is detected here, a countdown begins because they only have minutes to confirm if the rocket is coming their way. You only have, what, 3 minutes to make a determination as to whether or not the information indicates an attack.
We talk about 3 minutes to provide the president with a characterization of an attack on North America.
Not much time.
Very quick.
Just 3 minutes. That's why the early warning commander is not the man with his finger on the nuclear trigger.
The beauty of the system we have is you do not have the person that cries the attack is coming be the same person with their finger on the trigger. There's no doubt about it. You want your commander of NORAD, the guy who warns of attack, to err on the side of caution. On the other hand, since you want to have good deterrence based on threat, then the commander of strategic forces has to be very aggressive, has to be a person who is out to end the world with great enthusiasm.
4-star General Eugene Habiger was one of those men with his finger on the trigger. He was America's nuclear commander until 1998.
The only time I ever thought I'd see Moscow from the air was in a B-52 at 300 feet, getting ready to drop a nuclear weapon.
From here, General Habiger headed the U.S. Strategic Command, in charge of all of America's nuclear forces. Land, sea, and air. STRATCOM's mission, unchanged since the height of the Cold War, to stand ready within minutes to retaliate massively.
People assume when the Cold War was over, nuclear weapons went away. They have not. There's only one thing that can destroy the United States of America as we know it today, and that's those Russian nuclear warheads.
30 minutes as a missile flies. Russia's hidden nuclear empire, intact to this day. It stretches across 11 time zones. A network of secret cities and bases that appear on no map. Thousands of nuclear warheads still on full combat alert.
The loser didn't lose, and the loser doesn't think he lost, and the loser is not acting like he lost, and has not acted like he lost since 1991.
At the end of the Cold War, both sides quickly cut their arsenals from about 10,000 warheads to 6,000 each. It appeared that the old nuclear face-off was coming to a close. But since then, in spite of years of negotiations, no further reductions have been implemented. Undersecretary of Defense Walter Slocombe is the man who watches over U.S. nuclear policy. Why does the United States today still need thousands of nuclear warheads when the Cold War has been over for so long?
Because we think it's important to have a hedge against the possibility of problems in the future.
What does that mean, a hedge?
We cannot be absolutely certain of the course of the political power and policies in Russia, and therefore one of the reasons we maintain nuclear weapons is to have a hedge against the possibility of a serious deterioration in U.S.-Russian relations.
And this is the threat that men like Undersecretary Slocombe feel they need to counter. It's Russia's newest intercontinental ballistic missile, the Topol M, and it's moving here through the woods of Russia on full combat alert. So this green truck, or that missile, can take out any target.
Without even saying practically, every target on the globe.
That's New York, Los Angeles, Boston,
Это вот Нью-Йорк,
Chicago,
Лос-Анджелес,
in 30
Бостон,
minutes.
Чикаго, 30 минут и все.
Быстрее.
Sooner than that.
But it appears we are under attack at this point.
And so in both countries, rehearsals for nuclear war continue.
President is on the line. President is discussing options as we speak.
Men like General Horner practicing for the moment when they would have to inform the president that an attack was underway. I mean, can you say what you say?
Mr. President, this is Commander-in-Chief, North American Air Defense Command. You've received information about an impending attack on the United States. Here is the situation as I see it. You try and bring reality out of this unreal series of events.
Well, this was something that weighed reasonably heavily on you, didn't it, when you were in that job?
I think probably the tougher job would be to be the commander of the strategic forces, the guy who would have to order the end of the world.
Strap in. Arms up, chair locked.
There can be no question in anybody's mind that when someone is selected for missile duty,
Execute launch. 30 seconds.
that young 24, 25-year-old lieutenant
Okay, here we go. Ready, hands on keys.
10.
would do what he or she was directed to do by the President of the United States.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, mark.
Release. I have ELC message transmitted.
I agree.
Missile away.
When you would go through these exercises, how would it end?
They would generally end what they call the nuclear laydown.
Laydown.
Yes. You would end the exercise by having a massive attack from the Russians or the Soviet Union, followed by a retaliation from the U.S. And then we'd all go home to our wives and families and have breakfast or in the exercise.
And how did the United States come out in that exercise?
We didn't worry about it. It was over with.
Every day, a plane just like this one is flying somewhere high over the United States or waiting at alert. It's part of the invisible routine of America's nuclear command. But this weapon system is different from all the others. It's designed to serve as the ultimate guarantor of America's nuclear war plan. A plan that includes options that could result in the destruction of mankind. It's known as TACAMO. TACAMO, what does it mean?
TACAMO stands for Take Charge and Move Out, which is an acronym that they came up with probably back in the 70s, which means that we step up to the plate and go forward.
The unusual thing about this plane's mission is that it only comes online after the bombs have begun to fall. And the world below is engulfed in nuclear war.
If you ever had to be called into action in such a situation,
the whole thing would have failed, right?
That's correct.
The game's up. It's lost if you ever are there. And
well,
so
the game of deterrence may have been lost, but our mission just starts. That's why we're here today, is to train for that ultimate failure of deterrence and then be prepared to carry on.
He's talking about a mission of retaliation, a final battle that he and his fellow nuclear warriors are prepared to fight from this flying war room.
We provide an alternate survivable means to launch all the ICBMs in the Air Force inventory from this aircraft if the need arises.
this is all those ICBMs that the Peacekeepers, the Minutemen, you could launch them from here.
That's correct. If in a degraded environment, if the ground crews could not launch them, then we could launch them from this aircraft.
My primary duty is to advise the flag officer on board, whether it be a general or an admiral, of the nation's nuclear war plans.
It's become a routine for these men, but the plan they're talking about is the blueprint America would use to wage nuclear war. Little is known about the war plan, except that it was originally designed to annihilate the Soviet Union, and that it's created here at STRATCOM, headquarters of the U.S. Strategic Command. Down these hallways, behind those doors, teams of young men and women are busy preparing what amounts to death notices to America's enemies. They're the ones who pick the targets and tell the missileers where to strike. Essentially, we're talking about where the war plan is made is back here.
Yes, sir, behind those walls.
What's going on back there is one of the most tightly held secrets in the U.S. government, forbidden even to congressional leaders with top-secret clearances like Nebraska's Senator Bob Kerrey, who had served for years as the ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee.
I've never seen the targeting. They'll tell us in general terms what the targeting is, but they will not show us where the missiles themselves are going to fall. How many cities, how many, you know, where are the targets? Where do you drop these things?
Why does that concern you?
It concerns me because I don't think you can have a full sense of how much overkill we have until you see those detonations. I think if you saw a map lit up with red circles indicating thousands of detonations, you'd look at it and you would say, oh my God, we're going to do that? Yes, that's what we're going to do. And you'd say, isn't that a little too much?
This is not the first time that Congress tried to look into the war plan. 15 years ago, it asked this former missileer, Bruce Blair, to do just that. With his top-secret clearance, Blair was commissioned to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the war plan. But when the Pentagon reviewed his findings, they seized the report.
Did it ever get to the Congress?
No. The Pentagon reviewed it, decided that it was classified PSYOP, ESI, which stands for Single Integrated Operational Plan, Extremely Sensitive Information, which is the code word for the U.S. nuclear war plan. They classified it and declared that no one in the Senate had a clearance to read it, including me, its author. And they took it away from me, and it sits somewhere over in the Pentagon to this day.
In the 1990s, operating out of the Brookings Institute, Blair emerged as a widely respected expert on U.S.-Russian security issues, but always focusing on the nuclear war plan. And today, that war plan continues to follow the president, the commander-in-chief, wherever he goes. It's found inside this suitcase, the legendary nuclear football.
In the president's suitcase, are there actually many options that would call for massive retaliation?
Well, the major options are called major attack options, and there are basically 4 of them. And they would any one of them would destroy Russia as a functioning state.
In the spring of 2000, a group of senators began to worry about just that. They went to Blair with a question. Why does the Pentagon feel it needs to keep so many nuclear warheads on combat alert? The answer, Blair told them, can be found by understanding the war plan options that he believes are inside the president's suitcase.
MAO4, major attack option number 4. If the president chooses
this option, it would unleash at least 2,300 weapons immediately. It would just flatten Russia. It would be a radiating ruin for centuries. That's MAO4. That's a Cold War option that we keep in the nuclear football, the suitcase, at the disposal of the president. And that's what drives our current nuclear operation.
The Democratic caucus had a briefing by Bruce Blair. He came in and made a presentation to us. It was a terrific briefing, but it didn't give us the kind of detail of targeting that we wanted.
Kerrey, along with other senators, now decided that they had a responsibility to find out what was in the briefcase. Defense Undersecretary Walter Slocombe gave them a briefing. But when they asked for detailed information, Slocombe refused.
Some of them may have been unhappy. There is an established procedure by which we have briefed the relevant committees and leaders in the Congress on these issues.
The Pentagon's reluctance to discuss the war plan goes back to the Cold War, when Congress only allowed a handful of senators access to nuclear secrets.
Those are procedures which are established by the Congress every bit as much as by the executive branch, and we will abide by whatever process the Congress chooses to establish. What we were not prepared to do was sort of on the spot to change those long-standing procedures.
But Kerrey, along with other senators, is now pushing for greater access to the war plan.
Show me the detonations. Show me where you're going to put the detonations that you've decided are necessary inside of Russia in order to deter the Russians.
What we're looking at is the targeting against Russian nuclear forces.
To find out what's in the war plan, you might not need the Pentagon. That, at least, is what this nuclear physicist, Matthew McKenzie, and his bosses at the National Resources Defense Council say.
We can piece together, we believe, a very reasonable picture of what the war plan looks like.
Drawing on declassified information, from old NATO targeting studies to census data, they've come up with an elaborate theory of how STRATCOM puts its nuclear war plan together.
And we have 11 nuclear explosions, you know, in the inner region of Moscow, would produce 9.6 million fatalities.
McKenzie's motivation is quite simple. Let people know what's in the war plan, and they won't tolerate it.
When you're trying to evaluate some of the options that are in the president's nuclear suitcase, what kinds of deaths are we talking about?
With only on the order of 200 nuclear weapons targeted against Russian cities, it's possible to kill over 50 million Russians.
That's if the...
That's 200 warheads, about 2.5% of our current arsenal.
We've been talking about America's nuclear war plan, but there's a Russian nuclear war plan as well. Portrayed here is McKenzie's theory of that plan. The launch orders would come from here, headquarters of Russia's strategic rocket forces, in this secret city just on the edge of Moscow. It's a strangely charming setting for a place built to destroy America. But even the children here know the legend of the great gun their parents keep under the ground.
It is a very big gun, and it can break a world.
It can break the world.
Yes.
I sat outside your headquarters here talking to some young boys, and they said that they knew that underneath there was a great gun, that if it was ever used, it would end the world.
They are right to a certain extent. They are very close to the truth, by the way.
That is Russia's nuclear commander, General Vladimir Yakolev. The nightmare scenario in Washington was that one day a man in General Yakovlev's position would walk down these halls with orders to launch an attack. And on this day, Russia's nuclear commander agreed to take us down with him. We were on our way to the place where the red button is kept, in this room known simply as the Central Command Post. The clocks on the wall say it all. Washington, D.C., Moscow. as if frozen in time from the Cold War.
Look, here, isn't this the heart of the problem? We have become friends, and yet they still have these war plans intact, being rehearsed all the time, that would call for annihilating each other.
I
think this question should be asked not of military people. It should be asked of politicians more than us. Ask this question of politicians.
But Yakolev is not alone. It turns out that at least some of his American counterparts have been thinking the same way for some time now. One of them is General Chuck Horner, America's former early warning commander.
The commander's strategic command and I would frequently sit down and talk about the absurdity of having these large numbers of nuclear weapons.
How would those conversations go?
Well, where are we headed? What are we doing? Is the Cold War over? If it's over, why do we have these forces still opposing each other in the field?
It's just a small spot from up here, but for decades, it had come to symbolize one of America's greatest fears. On a map, it's 55 degrees north, 37 degrees east. On the U.S. nuclear war plan, it's always been ground zero.
This is the city that haunted America for decades. The Kremlin, Red Square, Moscow. It's the heart of what Ronald Reagan called the evil empire. But when you come here today, what you find is a city of churches and rampant capitalism. There are thousands of young Americans who live here.
And a mayor who wants even more to come.
I am very like American people, American business. I am very like to live in friendship.
And surprisingly, the city even opened itself up 2 years ago to this American, retired four-star General Lee Butler. Until 1994, he had been America's nuclear commander, responsible for the war plan that targeted Moscow.
It must be completely surreal for you on some levels, then, to be moving about in this city like a normal civilian, not thinking about destroying the city, but...
It goes beyond surreal as we ride in this van. Moscow is still the target of an enormous range of U.S. nuclear weapons. All of it on alert.
And that fact that thousands of American and Russian nuclear warheads are still on combat alert years after the Cold War had ended turned Butler into a man with a mission.
From the perspective of this one former Cold Warrior who has chosen to continue to embroil himself in these issues, the message is very clear. It's time to close the nuclear era.
But closing down the nuclear era is no small task. You understand that when you discover just how much of the old Soviet nuclear arsenal is still intact. This Typhoon-class submarine is a good place to begin. 2 football fields long, 8 stories high. It sails with up to 200 warheads. It's just one of a host of apocalyptic weapon systems spread out across Russia's 11 time zones in bases and facilities that appear on no map. Take a look at this rail-based missile train with its 30 warheads. And here, down deep under the missile base at Tatishevo, Russian missileers rehearsing the launch of a weapon they call Satan. The most destructive weapon ever made. The development of the Satan was overseen by this man, General Vladimir Dvorkin. He's Russia's chief nuclear strategist, and on this day, General Butler's host. The two men had met just after the Cold War ended, when they both believed it would be possible to quickly draw down the nuclear arsenals.
You know, and I know the history of these matters, and we know the opportunities that were lost.
Butler was talking about a moment in 1994 when the Clinton administration had chosen to stay at 3,500 warheads instead of accepting a Russian proposal to go down to 2,000. Today, Dvorkin says little has changed.
Every minute, even when we sit here with you. Why? 2,000 warheads of the United States, land-based missiles, are now kept in 30 seconds readiness for launch. 9 or 10 nuclear submarines are constantly at sea. How can that be explained?
That was the question we asked of the man who watches over U.S. nuclear policy, Defense Undersecretary Walter Slocombe.
I think if somebody looking at Russia has to have some concerns about the future stability, and our objective is to maintain a force which is an adequate deterrent against the kind of capability which Russia has.
But does that require thousands of nuclear warheads?
It certainly does not require the numbers that we now have.
It's well advertised that in the negotiations that have been taking place, the Russians are saying, let's go down lower. Let's go down to 1,500 warheads. And you and the administration said, no, it has to be 2,000 to 2,500, and we can't consider this now.
One of the reasons for that has to do with some other things that we want to address in the next round of arms control.
Like what?
Well, one is there are thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons besides the ones you're talking about, besides tactical ones, which the Russian force is very much larger than the Americans.
And tactical nuclear weapons, short-range nukes, are just one of the items that Slocombe suggests may be as important as those warheads that can reach America.
So that in some sense, this is like other negotiations. There are some things the Russians want, which we might in principle be able to agree to. There are other things that we want very much that we want to try to get accomplished in the negotiations. One problem that we need to address is what happens to the nuclear material after it's taken out of strategic or other nuclear weapons.
Ironically, the range of concerns that Slocombe points to, like loose nukes, spring not from Russia's strength, but from its weakness. The course caught the attention of the world, but it's only the latest in a string of breakdowns and near catastrophes in Russia's nuclear system. They underscore what's at stake in the arms negotiations. The dispute over national missile defense and NATO expansion get all the headlines. But the Russians say that the source of the bad feelings always goes back to the numbers, to the Russian perception that in every arms negotiation since the end of the Cold War, it's the Russians, not the Americans, who want fewer nuclear weapons.
The paradox of the situation is in the fact that we trusted each other more during the Cold War than we do now.
Russian spy satellites peer down on America every day. Military installations like Vandenberg Air Force Base in California are frequent targets. And you can imagine how confusing it would have been if the Russians had happened to be looking in on this annual May ritual. They are missileers from all across America. They've come here to compete in something called the Guardian Challenge. It's an Olympics of sorts for America's nuclear warriors.
You guys are studs!
And they all have the same conviction about why it's so important for them to hone their skills.
By being ready and available and having those missiles on alert, we're keeping America safe and free.
And you've got no second thoughts about that?
Nope. Not if that's what the president tells me to do.
What they all share is a profession that revolves around weapons of mass destruction. These are the best and the brightest of America's nuclear forces.
And this is their annual Top Gun award ceremony. It's an annual rite, a celebration of deterrence. And there was no greater believer in deterrence than four-star General Eugene Habiger, America's nuclear commander in 1998 when these pictures were taken. But by this night, Habiger had come to believe that he and his missileers were being placed in an untenable position by America's political leaders, who were causing them to operate a nuclear arsenal so large that it could not possibly be justified.
Why are we still doing this? It hits right to the core of the issue that you and I have spent so many hours talking about. And that is, there's only one thing that can destroy the United States of America as we know it today, and that's those Russian nuclear warheads. And that's why we need to get down to lower and lower numbers and to develop this trust.
Arrival KC-01 Heavy at 37.
A meeting in Omaha, Nebraska, 1998.
Admiral, Jones. Welcome, sir.
You're looking at Russia's nuclear commander.
You've had a long trip. It's good to have you here.
General Vladimir Yakolev. Just about the last person you'd expect to see General Habiger escorting into his nuclear headquarters in the middle of the night.
Well, welcome to my command center.
And the next morning, into his war room.
I'm going to put you in my chair. Please do not touch anything.
And what was running in your mind when you initiated all of this?
What was running through my mind was the frustration of the lack of movement, of trust and confidence in each other when it came to arms control reductions. And I felt that if the senior Russian military leadership and I could hit it off and open up a dialogue, that perhaps we could energize the civilian side of the House to move out more aggressively.
I will jump in front of you, sir, if they try to shoot you. Yes,
and what unfolded was an unexpected twist in American diplomacy, with Habiger giving this former adversary a tour of the most sensitive U.S. nuclear facilities. Standing in the shadow of America's most lethal weapon, the Peacekeeper, the generals seem more like diplomats than warriors.
I think this is amazing that you and I are standing here.
Я тоже вот это я вообще появляется мысль создать единые, может быть, войска.
I was thinking about the same way. I was thinking about maybe we should create the combined forces together.
The U.S. and Russia may not be joining forces anytime soon, but it was a moment of hope for these two men. They commanded the most powerful forces on Earth, forces still ready to destroy each other. And that is exactly what General Habiger had been prepared to do on each of the sorties he had made to the borders of the Soviet Union as a Cold War bomber pilot. But when he finally flew all the way into Moscow in 1998 as head of U.S. nuclear forces, it was to continue his diplomacy with Russia's nuclear commander.
Thank you for having us.
But even as Yakolev swept Habiger across his secret empire, U.S.-Russian relations were taking a turn for the worse. The United States had bombed Russia's old ally, Iraq, and it was moving now with NATO against another Russian ally, the Serbs in Yugoslavia.
Everything was going very well up to this point. And then you blew it.
But you'd never know anything was wrong, watching these men as they engaged in their confidence-building rituals.
Hey, not if, but when you complete this ritual, you will be a warrior. At a higher level than you are now.
It was a ritual out of Habiger's bomber pilot past.
There is no gagging allowed.
A raw egg, a bottle of Jeremiah Weed bourbon, and what amounts to a fraternity initiation ritual. Habiger had even brought along his successor, Admiral Mies, to ensure continuity in this blooming relationship.
Приступим, да? Well, let's go get to it.
And that resulted in in a dialogue that was extraordinary, talking about issues such as national missile defense, talking about issues such as getting down to lower and lower levels, how we could influence that decision-making process. And because of that trust that was built up very quickly, we opened up doors in tens of months that had never been opened before.
And you were leaving this whole experience at the end of it full of hope, correct?
Yes.
A snapshot of what once seemed possible. Russia and America's nuclear commanders trying to put a stalled arms reduction process back on track. But that was before the 1999 U.S. bombing of Serbia, before the Russian government ordered their missileers to sever their fledgling relationship with the Americans. It stopped?
Unfortunately, yes.
It must have been disturbing to you.
No, it was. I was very disappointed.
Relations between the U.S. and Russian military remain strained. Although some contacts have resumed, treaties which call for deep cuts in the number of warheads have been locked in negotiations for years.
There's something wrong here.
What is wrong?
I want to make sure that the military doesn't get the bad rap for, trying to keep weapons at high levels.
His point was simple. It's the politicians that set the military agenda. Generals just implement it. Who actually decides the nature of the war plan?
Well, the objectives are set by a directive that comes from the president.
Why doesn't he just change the directive?
That's a viable alternative, a viable option for the president.
Let's say it was day one of the next president, and you were to be asked, do you think it's a good idea to take a new look at that directive, maybe to rethink the way that we define deterrence?
I would support that position.
What's at stake here?
What's at stake is to put the Cold War behind us.
Habiger is only the latest member of the nuclear establishment to challenge U.S. nuclear policy. But what separates him from the growing ranks of abolitionists, men like General Butler who want to get rid of all nuclear weapons, is his conviction that they are still necessary. You're a believer in nuclear deterrence. You're not an abolitionist, correct?
And I never will be.
And you want to hold on to this nuclear deterrence force on some level?
At a much lower level, yes.
But you have come out as a, I guess, critic in your own way, respectful manner, but very substantively. What has prompted you to do this?
What has prompted me is a realization that unless people like myself become vocal, become engaged, that things aren't going to happen.
So in some ways, you carry a burden from those days when you were prepared to implement a plan that would have essentially wiped out mankind.
Yes.
And that burden will soon rest with the next president. It will follow him wherever he goes. The nuclear suitcase, with the option inside that calls for all-out war. Unless someone changes that mission, it's something the missileers of Russia and the United States will continue to rehearse as a matter of routine.
3, 2, 1, mark.
The Soviet Union may be gone, the Cold War may be over, but as we've just seen, nuclear weapons are on alert almost as if nothing had changed. The presidential candidates have staked out rival positions. George W. Bush says he will scrap the Cold War formula for arms reductions. Instead of protracted negotiations, Bush says he'll simply take the weapons that he deems unneeded off alert, regardless of what the Russians do. Gore wants to go the more traditional route of step-by-step negotiations. Both candidates have also said they are prepared to build a national missile defense, though they apparently disagree about the scope of such a system and how to deal with Russian objections that such a system might violate existing treaties. That's our broadcast. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jeff Greenfield. We'll see you next week on Democracy in America.
For more in-depth coverage of the issues discussed on Democracy in America, go to CNN.com. Get expanded show interviews on demand and web-exclusive analysis. Plus, see what Bush and Gore's views are on the nuclear agenda. It's all at CNN.com/democracy.